nor a Frenchman, and decided to put whatever it was they'd found on trial right there on the beach. Since the monkey wouldn't answer any questions on the grounds that it was a monkey, the locals decided that the monkey must be in cahoots with the French. The monkey, which wasn't even given proper legal representation, was sentenced to death and was hung using the mast of the boat on which it had served as the ship's entertainment. And so, according to the legend, that's how a monkey in a uniform was hung by the British. It is, to be fair, clearly untrue, but it does reveal a few things about who we are as a people. For one, there is a possibility that the legend began because a young boy in the boat, a powder monkey, hired to prime the cannons, was hung. Which, granted, would mean we aren't monkey killers, but, oh no, I can assure you the crime is more fucking heinous than that, Your Honour, is not the most effective defence in a monkey murder trial. It is also very possible that this was all just made up by a rival town to smear them as a kind of people upon whom who, upon seeing an adorable monkey in full navy uniform, would try the bastard and hang it, which would make us bellends in a slightly different way, just not of the monkey hanging variety. Weirdly, the term monkey hangers is now worn with pride by many locals, and is a nickname of several local sports teams. So even if we didn't hang a monkey, we've incorrectly identified the act of hanging monkeys as something worthwhile to list on our CVs. Number 2. We hired pirates to go beat the crap out of the Spanish in peacetime. The British have a reputation, at least in films and Captain Pugwash, of being the noblemen of the seas, sailing around and fighting pirates, which is entirely unearned, as we had our own state-sanctioned pirates named the Sea Dogs, who we hired to beat the crap out of Spanish sailors during peacetime. Queen Elizabeth I authorised a group of essentially state-sponsored pirates, who were also slavers, of course, to steal from the Spanish as long as she got a cut of the booty. They were allowed to carry the letters of marque, a licence to attack and capture other vessels. It was essentially like James Bond's licence to kill, if James Bond was just some random thief rather than a spy, and had open intentions to use it purely for the purposes of being a prick. The idea was the Sea Dogs would sail around the Atlantic and Caribbean stealing money from the Spanish and reducing their navy size at the same time. The Queen was worried about imminent war with the Spanish, probably provoked somewhat by the kind of moves such as legalising killing the Spanish for booty. Amongst the Sea Dogs were some of the most famous sailors in history, including Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir John Hawkins. The most notorious, however, was Sir Francis Drake, who you probably know as defeating the Spanish Armada and being the second person to circumnavigate the globe. He achieved this remarkable latter feat by robbing the Spanish at every available opportunity, travelling up the west coast of South America, ransacking Spanish ports and commandeering ships. Not just a prick while at sea, he would also pull into Caribbean ports and demand money. He would then burn down parts of the city until he received whatever ransom he'd set. For this he earned the nickname El Drac, or the Dragon. During one trip he captured the town of St. Augustine in Florida. He defended it for a few days from attack by Spanish and Native Americans, looted it a bit, and then burned the whole town to the ground, including all the crops. Another time, he and his men stopped off briefly to get into a fight with the indigenous residents of southern Patagonia, becoming the very first Europeans to slaughter these particular natives mercilessly. 7 months after he returned from his Spanish murder tour, he was knighted for his efforts in the field of setting fire to Spanish towns and boats, somewhat to the irritation of the King of Spain. Number 3. We plan to eradicate the Native Americans by giving them blankets. Smallpox was one of the deadliest viruses in human history, killing millions around the world in horrible agony. The infected developed massive fevers, blisters and scabs, vomited, got diarrhoea and had their immune systems crippled, which for many eventually led to their deaths. It's not something you'd wish on your own worst enemy, unless you're British, of course, in which case, knock yourself out. During the 7 Years' War, we tried to use smallpox as a biological weapon against the Native Americans, who weren't even close to our number one worst enemy at the time. But there was an outbreak of smallpox at one of our outposts, Fort Pitt, in 1763. Field Marshal Geoffrey Amherst was told about the situation. Without pausing to remark, "Oh no, how terrible, smallpox is bad," like a regular human being, Geoffrey saw the potential of weaponising the disease against the Native Americans, holding us under siege at the fort. He authorised the use of smallpox-infected linen against them. Could it not be contrived to send the smallpox among those disaffected tribes of Indians? He wrote to Colonel Henry Bouquet in a Bond villanesque message so badly coded you could practically hear the wink. We must on this occasion use every stratagem in our power to reduce them. Bouquet replied and promised to give it a shot, taking careful steps not to infect himself whilst collecting a scab-filled blanket from an infected patient. You'll do well to try to inoculate the Indians by means of blankets, Geoffrey continued, going full on Dalek this time, as well as to try every other method that can serve to extirpate this execrable race. Execrable? I have no idea how you say that. Anyway, the blankets and a handkerchief were given as gifts to Native American diplomats during talks aiming to persuade the British to abandon the fort. Though the Native Americans did have an outbreak during 1763 to 64, it's not known whether this was directly caused by our weaponised linen. It's unlikely they could spread the disease easily without transporting it in a biohazard fridge, which would raise suspicions somewhat, even if fridges had been invented by that point. But it doesn't make us better as a people that we had the genocidal intent, but not the adequate fridges to carry it out. Number 4. We introduced homophobic laws to the world, then judged them for being homophobic. The British get pretty judgy, and rightly so, of governments that still ban homosexual relationships. But of 71 countries around the world where it's illegal, over half of them are former British colonies. As much as it would be nice to sit back and say, "What a wild coincidence, lordy lordy, really how odd, anyway, must dash," the reason for that is we put the laws there in the first place. In over 30 of these countries, they are still using the original laws, or laws based on the ones we put in place well over 100 years ago. We may still feel prudish now. I, for one, won't look at the screen during Game of Thrones in case there are boobs and instead treat it like an audiobook. Don't pretend you don't do the same. But British Victorians were extremely repressed when it came to sex, and strongly felt they should impose this on other nations. When we went around the world, we saw people who aren't adhering to our own repressed view of sexuality and decided that it had to stop. It's like going to a foreign country on purpose and then complaining about how foreign it is when you arrive, which, to be fair to the Victorians, is an activity we still do. British colonists at the time documented widespread homosexuality in the countries they were colonising. One explorer, Sir Richard Francis Burton, wrote about a sotadic zone across Europe, North Africa, most of Asia, and the entirety of North and South America, where romantic sexual relationships between men were many, allowed and celebrated, which suggests that homosexuality laws were by no means something they themselves were screaming out for. Britain, on the other hand, was concerned with it, as well as feeling the need to correct the natives' morals, an odd thing to want to do when you don't exactly have the high ground as an invader ruling with massive cannons. We also introduced the laws to protect ourselves and our soldiers and officials from being corrupted by natives who might turn military camps into replicas of Sodom and Gomorrah, whilst they were over there far away from their wives. Essentially, a big part of why homosexuality was outlawed in these countries was because we were worried we might like it. The laws we put in place, starting in India as a test run before implementing them elsewhere, were terrible and helped shape attitudes for years to come. Not including ages of consent or consent itself in the law meant that gay consensual relationships were conflated with rape and paedophilia, both in terms of the law and later in terms of wider attitudes. Towards the end of the empire, our own attitudes started, incredibly slowly, to shift in the right direction. But we let go of our colonies just before decriminalising homosexual relationships ourselves, leaving the laws in place throughout the former empire. We came in, we imposed laws against homosexuality that most of these places weren't calling for, and we made people believe homosexuality was wrong. And then, harm already done, we changed our minds and judged them for not being liberal like us. The end. Don't forget to like and subscribe and press the wee bell notification. And a huge big thank you to all my subscribers and patrons. See you next week. Bye bye.